All right, welcome everyone. So happy to see you joining us again. Hello to Greeno Bino, Mel, Scott, Gabriella, Michelle, Jens, Kevin, Cam, and Adriana. So happy to see all of you joining in once again. And this evening, we're absolutely delighted to have our resident monastic, Ayyā Somā, giving the meditation instructions and the Dharma talk this evening. And hello, Andrew. So happy to see you as well. Hope you're feeling all right. And we have one more special guest just peeking out at the bottom of the camera. You might see some little fuzzy black ears poking up. So this is Stan, our resident cat. Yep, he's just making his way onto the monastic lap. He loves the monastic laps. I'll adjust the camera just a little bit. There we go. Yes, little buddy on the camera. Okay. Without further ado, we can all gaze adoringly at the cat. Practice meditation together. So I'll pass it over to Ayyā Somā, who will no doubt be distracted by Stan. But despite that, we have the wonderful opportunity to listen to her sharing Dhamma with us. So please ignore the cat and pay attention to the monk instead. Greeno Bino says, best part is the cat. Just kidding. Lots of people very happy about the appearance of Stan. I'm sure happy about you as well.
Thank you, and thank you, Stan, for honoring me with your presence tonight. It will be very useful for Maca Meditation, both visual and physical aid. All right, well, welcome everyone. Good to see you virtually, and we can start with some Maca Meditation. So if you're not in a sitting position, you can get into a sitting position. Excuse me. Okay. So get into a comfortable upright sitting position, and you can either close your eyes or keep them slightly open, especially if you feel a little tired. And take a few moments to scan through the body, from the head all the way to the feet, releasing any points of tension that there might be in the body. Relaxing your forehead, your jaw, your shoulders, relaxing your arms, your belly, relaxing your breath. And putting a nice smile on your face. Start to bring up to the mind a caring wish for yourself to be happy. Repeating to yourself, May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. Imbuing your mind with loving kindness and really wishing for yourself to be free from greed, free from hatred, free from delusion. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe.
Wishing for the mind to be entirely free of the hindrances, imbued with loving kindness. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. Bringing to mind the fact that the happier we are, the more we can be of benefit to ourselves and others. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. And gradually extending this loving kindness to all the beings that you're sharing the room with, whether it's humans or non-humans. Wishing for all beings, whether they're people or whether they're fuzzy animals, wishing for them to be happy. May they be happy. May they be healthy. May they be safe. Really trying to grow and nurture our loving kindness to pervade the entire neighborhood where we are. May everyone be happy. May everyone be peaceful. May everyone be safe. extending our loving kindness, in particular, to all the doctors, all the nurses, and all the healthcare workers out there working hard to protect every being. And also to all the victims of the virus and to everyone struggling with the virus. Wishing for everyone, including ourselves, to be happy. May we all be happy. May we all be healthy. May we all be safe.
Well, thank you, Ayya, for leading us in a period of meditation. And thank you, Stan, for providing a visual meditation object. And a number of people have joined in and made comments. So, hello, Bobby. Hello, Yulia, who was very excited to see Stan. Adriana said, "Aw." Reed says, hello, venerables and friends and kitty. Claudia says, meow, Stan. Sally says, hello. Ryan, Catalina, Gouache, who also remembers Stan. Hello, Melinda. Yes, that is in fact Stan. Welcome, Melinda. Hello, Jen. Gabriella says, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Bobby says, thank you, Ayya. My dog tries to do the same thing when I meditate. Not so fun when they're over 100 pounds. LOL. Adriana says, thank you, Ayya. That was beautiful. Anjali, 3 empty sadhus. Anjali, and 1 extra for Stanley. Okay, so the cat is clearly a hit. And of course,
now in very cat manner.
He's impermanent like everything else. Oh, maybe not. Maybe not. He's permanent again.
Come on, Stan. You're the celebrity. Sit. Well done.
Okay. Hello, Elizabeth. Hello, Mohammed. Welcome. Mohammed says, oh, kitty. Okay. All right. So at this point, we'd like to invite Ayyā Somā to say a few words of Dhamma. So please, whenever you feel is appropriate.
All right. Thank you, Bantin, and thank you, Stan, for providing a nice meditation object for me. He was purring while I was meditating, which was quite soothing and lovely. And now he's going to May to help her practice metta as well. So we also call him Ajahn Metta, Stan. He's taught metta in action to many of us. He also makes it a little challenging to ring the bell. So I'm sorry if it sounded a little bit goofy. But welcome everyone. So I believe the subject tonight was karma, the consequences of karma. So, where to start? I'm still getting used to what I call the stream of consciousness, of having to start to talk alone by myself for a period of time. So I'm looking for some inspiration to come into the mind. So when we talk about karma, which is one of the most, I think, misunderstood or troublesome aspects of Buddhist practice, especially for people who are not born Buddhist, I think, at least for me, it was a lot came with a misunderstanding of what karma, first and foremost, was, and what it was. The place it had within Rebirth, and the place it had also within, obviously, the whole Buddhist path at large. And a lot of times we talk about good and bad karma. So we tend to use kind of blanket statement, big generalizations when we say good karma, this is good karma, this is bad karma. So there's a little bit of a confusion, I would say, in how we use the term, kind of like as if it were a sort of destiny, or a sort of uncontrollable kind of thing that appears that we don't quite know where it's coming from, and that kind of happens. Like this pandemic is really bad karma. And who knows what we did in the past to deserve this. So there is a bit of a fatalistic kind of relationship with our experience. And there's also the idea that it's something we have very little control towards. But the actual meaning of karma means action. So when we think that karma means action, there's something empowering about that, rather than disempowering, rather than a sort of submissive connotation. So we talk about actually karma and vipaka in Buddhism. So karma being the action and vipaka being the consequences of our actions. And there's also, we tend to talk about karma a lot in Buddhist terms, but there is a sort of sense of causality in a lot of sayings throughout the world, regardless of the spiritual and religious belief systems. So in Italy, for example, my grandmother used to always say, "Chi semina raccoglie," which means whoever puts seeds then will reap the results of whatever they have sown in the ground. I think there is an equivalent saying in English, right, Bante?
Yeah. You reap what you sow.
That one. You reap what you sow. Reap. Have a bit of a problem pronouncing that one. So you reap what you sow, but also what goes around comes around. So there is also a kind of sense of retribution. So it's quite interesting how we, and myself as well, actually, I kind of, not only did I hear that from my grandparents and from my parents, but I also think I probably used some of these sayings most of my life as well. But then I encountered a Buddhist practice. I encountered this concept of karma, which, by the way, I think I was using this word a little inappropriately or appropriately, I'm not quite sure, for most of my life as well. But then when I started reflecting on it at the very beginning of my path, I had a very strong reaction towards it, a strong disapproval towards it. And also a bit of sort of hurt in terms of thinking that there was whatever I perceived as suffering in my life was sort of the causes of my own actions in the past. And as my practice kept on moving forward, at a certain point, I had to kind of face it and go, well, how is there this dichotomy? On one hand, I have this sense of causality here. And on the other hand, I have this sort of aversion towards a sense of responsibility towards my experience. So I felt that the matter was worth investigating the matter further. So I spent lots and lots of time asking all the lovely monastics that have come to Buddhist insights, asking them questions about karma and trying to really understand it. And the quest is actually still not over. I'm still in the process of figuring out answers for myself. But what I kind of really wanted to bring up to you was not really much answers, but rather questions. And I feel like what really has nourished my path, or my understanding, my experience of the path in these years, has been asking all these questions rather than finding answers. So asking questions and looking for what my mind thought was the answers, and deconstructing my experience of reality while in the process of asking these questions. So getting back to the sort of dichotomy that I was bringing beforehand of what is good karma and what is bad karma, I realized that as running this organization for several years and having so many different people, there are so many people always from all over the world, which is the beauty of Buddhist insights, that there are so many different shades of what we perceive as good and what we perceive as bad karma. So not necessarily what is perceived as somewhat good in, say, Chinese culture is necessarily a good karma, perceived as good karma in Burmese culture, or in Italian culture, or American culture. And this is the 4 cultures that we currently have in the room. Mine being the Italian one. And similarly, there's also not
necessarily the same equivalence of what is bad karma in or bad results in all of these cultures. There's sometimes some overlap, but there's not quite much the same exact sort of shape and form of it. So as we kind of navigate the landscape of Dharma centers and Buddhist countries, Buddhist environments, Buddhist converts, Buddhist-born people, we'll always find some sort of different shades of what is brought up to us in terms of it being something beneficial or not beneficial. But what is it that we think is good? And what is it do we think is bad? And why do we have those ideas? Where are they based? What is the base of this, if they're not absolute? And when we look also at the suttas, actually, there's a prevalent idea of, in a lot of traditional contexts where, for example, gender is brought up as being the fruit of bad karma, which when I was first introduced to this concept, I was quite shocked, actually, because I had never really thought about my gender having any kind of sort of role in my life to a certain extent, to a certain degree. It was never something that I perceived an obstacle. But then at a certain point of my practice, it was presented to me that due to my gender, there were certain problematics, or due to that females, that it was a kind of like bad rebirth to be in the shape and form of a female, which was quite bizarre for me. I was kind of like, well, where is this coming from? So I used to, background note, I came to the realization that most of my life I had lived in a little like privileged bubble, actually, when it comes to gender, which was the bubble of working in the editorial fashion field for most of my adult life, where the majority of people in power there are women. So all my bosses actually were women. If they weren't women, they were gay men. So it was definitely not something that was ever presented to me as an obstacle. In fact, the most powerful woman in the fashion field is actually the most powerful person, full stop, in the fashion industry is Anna Wintour. Some of you may know her. And definitely her gender was not an obstacle in having that role. So living in that environment for most of my adult life made me quite oblivious towards the implications that gender had for a lot of women, and actually quite, I have to say, unsympathetic towards the cause. It was something that I found for the most part obsolete, not quite relevant to my experience in this day and age. Something that maybe my mother at a certain point had to deal with, but definitely it was not part of my experience, and that no kind of obstacle was present in my path. And then all of a sudden I was kind of like shocked with, oh, by the way, your gender has a sort of, it's actually bad karma to be born a woman. So I was like, that's interesting. Is it really? And how so? And how is it good karma to be a woman? I was thinking, but did the Buddha actually ever say that it's bad karma to be a woman? Or is it bad karma? Or is it good karma to be a man? And all I've been able to find, for example, when there's this beautiful sutta when Queen Malika, I believe it, right? Queen Malika, I'm pronouncing it right, goes to the Buddha and asks him, what were the causes of her being, if I remember correctly, influential, rich, but ugly? Why did she have those qualities, and why were those qualities? Why did we have different people having different qualities of this kind, sort of this different combination of these qualities? And the Buddha never says anything about gender. Never said, oh well, you know, you're a female, bad karma, try again next time. But he actually talks about in terms of cause and consequence. And in more general terms, so in terms of, once again, being influential, being rich, being beautiful. And so that generosity brings beauty, and the opposite of, generosity brings wealth. Anger brings ugliness. So actually, dwelling in a mind of loving, with a mind of loving kindness, produces beautiful traits. And mudita, so rejoicing in other people's good fortune, makes one influential. And vice versa, being jealous and envious and dwelling in those mind states brings us to be less influential. So where is it that we get concepts like, all of a sudden, half of the world population, it's bad karma to be born in with a particular gender? Or sometimes actually in Western circles, there is often the question, oh, well, does it mean having a particular skin color? Does that equate to bad karma or good karma? So is it being white male then good karma, and being anything other than a white male bad karma? So where is it that we actually create these ideas? Where are they coming from? Where are they based from? Because they're not based in the suttas, but they're rather based in what our idea, I think, of good and bad is coming from. Stan definitely has a different, if you can't see him, this is Stan distracting us from the subject matter. So anyway, my invitation is to actually look at where we think all of these ideas are coming from and starting to deconstruct them. So where our cultural conditioning is coming from, and really seeing it, and then drawing parallels with the Dhamma, and seeing whether or not something in accordance to Dhamma or something is not in accordance to Dhamma. And when we find thoughts presented to us, whether it's from teachers, whether it's from books, whether it's from our own mind, to start questioning it. Just like actually what the Buddha has taught us in the Kalama Sutta, to not believe in something just because we read it in a book, not to believe in something just because someone says it to us, not because we think we like to believe in something, not because we think about it, but because we actually truly take the time to investigate it. So luckily, we will be going through the Kalama Sutta during Sutta study with Bhante Suttaza, so we'll have a great opportunity to actually really delve into the teachings and actually really understand what our job is. And our job is to investigate, first and foremost, our reality, and to actually really see, understand where are we basing our ideas of good and bad, and deconstructing it. And focusing rather than on making these blanket statements on ourselves and also on others, whether something is good or whether the product is of good karma, whether the product is of bad karma, focusing actually on karma, which is action. So we have no idea why right now we are, we have brown eyes, a female body, and we were born in Italy. We can spend so much time creating the weirdest speculations and ideas. And I think that's probably also why the Buddha was saying that if we started contemplating too much karma, at a certain point our head would explode, because we could create so many different delusional stories about why we're embodying this particular shape and form. But what we can really do, what we can really focus in every moment, it's not in the vipaka, but rather on the karma, on the action. So what is the action that we can do right now, which leads to the wholesome? What is the action that leads to the unwholesome that we should avoid? And that's why I feel like the Buddha actually kind of gave us those sort of outlines. It was not to quote unquote blame us for our current condition, but rather to give us some sort of kind of pointers. Like, if you keep on being stingy, well, definitely there won't be that many resources for you in the future. Or if you keep on being jealous, probably you're not going to have much influence. So kind of highlighting the cause and consequence, but more on right here, right now. So what are the actions that we should be focusing on in this moment in order to create better conditions for ourselves that ultimately will lead to awakening? Because that's why we're practicing to begin with, not to become rich, not to become influential, not to become beautiful, but rather to attain supreme nibbana, to reach the complete cessation of greed, hatred, and delusion, to attain unconditional happiness. So these are the results that we should be aiming at, and this is how we shape the path towards that. And that's a skillful way, I think, of thinking about karma. So the other reflection that I wanted to share, and we have a broken clock, so I was like, oh, it's 7:45. Wow. It's very tricky. It's like, wow, I'm only talking for like 15 minutes. Actually, minus 15 minutes. So another reflection that I wanted to bring forward was also thinking that, getting back to actually what I was saying, that, that sort of kind of state of privilege that I had of not having to face much oppression as a female in my adult life prior to my Buddhist practice. So in my previous life within this life, made me quite inconsiderate and off-tuned with the suffering of other people, namely of my same gender, when I started practicing. I still remember, I can never forget actually, one of the first episodes that kind of came to me getting woke, not awakened, but I got woke during these the past couple of years of running Buddhist Insights, working still on the awakening. But I remember there was a female monastic that came, and she was sharing a lot of her distress and her less than positive experiences in the path, and in particular with a monk that I had actually never met, but I had read so many beautiful books written by him, and he had made such an impact in my Buddhist practice. And it was really interesting because at a certain point, while she was talking about, her less than ideal experience in that situation, instead of my mind going towards like really feeling, really listening to her, really kind of even asking myself, like, why is she having this experience of reality? My mind went towards total aversion and defensive mode towards this monk that I hadn't even met. So it was namely an attachment towards the teachings that I had found and whatever this person had kind of meant within my in my sort of path towards Buddhism. So I didn't quite have this understanding of my actions while the interaction was happening, but it was a great source of reflection afterwards once I cooled off from my irritation. And I remember thinking, wow, why do I feel so strongly about a stranger, but I have zero empathy towards someone who's in front of me sharing her distress? And I have to say that as time has gone by, and especially I took this form and had to face some of the, from a kind of story that was told to me by a monastic, a female monastic, I became the female monastic. I became the protagonist of the story. My empathy and my compassion for her have grown immensely. But also the realization of how sometimes privilege is not necessarily like the most ideal of states. It's not really great karma because it makes you oftentimes very blind to suffering in and of itself, and your suffering and other people's suffering. And also remembering the realization that sometimes it's a question of opportunity, that the sort of role between the person who oppresses and the oppressor is interchangeable. And oftentimes, if we have the opportunity to oppress others, we do it. If we have the opportunity to not care, we do it, we take it. And it's only uncomfortable when we're on the other end of the equation. So at the very beginning, when I started getting at the other end of the equation, I started feeling sorry for myself. And I still do from time to time feel sorry for myself because I'm an unenlightened being. But now I also try to use it as a really like a great instrument for developing compassion, for developing empathy, for developing a better understanding of what it feels like to be in a less, not an ideal situation, even when, I don't have the shape and form to be the victim of that oppression. So I have like lots of friends, for example, who have been constantly discriminated because of their sexual preferences by the religion that is prevalent in my country. And I have to say that up until recently, it was the kind of empathy that I had was on an intellectual level. Now I managed to cultivate a real care for that, real compassion, real empathy, really going like, wow, that is really awful. I'm really sorry that you have to go through that. But then also the springing the action of how can I help, if not eliminate, alleviate that within my means, within my sort of immediate sphere of action. And we all have power within our sort of immediate grounds. We might not be able to change the entire world or entire people, but we are always capable of making even the most little of changes. And even the most little of change means, like, for example, caring about someone, really listening to someone when they're experiencing suffering, really trying to think, what would it feel like to be in that situation? And how can I actually grow my empathy? And how can I alleviate the suffering for so many other beings, including myself? So I think that's all I had to kind of share tonight. It's not that many answers, but rather more, as I said, questions and reflections and thoughts, food for thought, as they say. So if there's some questions or thoughts that you would like to share, feel free to put them in the live chat. No difficult questions. The difficult questions are for Bhante Sutaso.
Okay, well, thank you, Ayya, for sharing words of Dhamma. And many people have expressed their appreciation while you've been talking. And there's also been a lively discussion happening in the live chat throughout all this time. So Ryan says, thank you for the wonderful talk. Gabriella says, this is wonderful. A bunch of other things. But let me scroll back up to the top here and start reading through some of what was said.
You're getting all the fun there, the live chat.
Yeah. So let's see. The very first, starting at the top, Reed asks, can Stan and his Dhamma cone lead a metta session someday?
Ooh, yes.
Hello, Marielle. Danny, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, says, thank you so much for taking the time to share your energy of kindness with the world. May we remember the millions of animals killed daily for human consumption, and may we learn our lesson. Sally says, Kitty want to listen to Dhamma talk? Gabriella asks, on the workings of kamma, what is the kind of kamma that unmakes kamma?
Well, the kamma that leads towards awakening, because it's only with awakening that there is no kamma to be done. So whatever goes in towards that direction, that undoes it.
Ryan says, you reap what you sow is from the Bible. Galatians 6. Tin, hello, Tin.
See, everything is in Italy, like the comments saying apparently you're all like from the Bible somewhere. It's just that I had a very secular upbringing. So I'm not quite sure what is secular and what is actually like religious.
Then Gabriella says, intention, what is good and bad is intentions. In the Nibbedika Sutta AN 6.63, the Buddha says, it is intention that I call deeds. For after making a choice, one acts by way of body, speech, and mind. I think deeds here is a translation of karma.
Yeah.
Greeno Bino says, we can't go too detailed on karma at times, so I brings up this unfortunate bit in AN 4.77. These people really know their suttas.
Yeah, they're great. I think you guys should come and give Dhamma talks, and we should like videotape you.
They continue, I also am not aware of any sutta specifically detailing womanhood as bad karma. Rupa asks, and this was the start of a long discussion going on while you were talking. Rupa asks, is it true that the Buddha will always be a male and a female won't be a Buddha?
Is that for me, or is it part of the question?
Well, that was what sparked the whole conversation, but I think it was originally aimed at you.
Well, let's see. Let's go through the answers if they cover it.
Greeno Bino says, loving this talk. Gabriella says, While a female can be a Buddha, both Savaka Buddhas and Pacceka Buddhas, just not a Samma Sambuddha, but same with literally every man now, because the Samma Sambuddha has come and gone. Should I keep going?
Sure. Yeah.
It carries on from there. Gouache says, Trisha, I think that's
Trisha. Yeah.
Okay, so Trisha says, thank you for talking about this, Ayya. I was just reading about gender in Buddhism today and was getting confused. Gabriella says, in the mind, they come from bad intentions in the mind. I'm not sure what that's referring to. It might have been related to what you were saying at the time. Mohammed asks, why can't a woman be a Samma Sambuddha? Gabriella says, it's in one of the suttas. Mohammed says, but why? And Gabriella says, a woman cannot be a Samma Sambuddha, cannot be Namuchi Mara, cannot be Saka, and cannot be Mahabrahma. Jen says, it's all social constructs that bind us and hold humankind back from true progression. Gabriella says, since women are discriminated against, is my guess, not by the Dhamma, but by society. Mohammed says, question mark. Mohammed says, why does karma affect your physical appearance? Gabriella answers, the Buddha said it is because you are mad and it makes your face look ugly. Have you ever looked at your face when you are mad? Hint, it looks ugly. Mohammed asks, but what defines ugly or beautiful here? Aren't those subjective? Always wondered when I hear things like these. Gabriella refers to Anguttara Nikaya 4.197, the Queen Malika Sutta, which is the one that you were referring to earlier. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of amusing remarks about getting woke but not awakened. Oh gosh, there's even more stuff going on. Do you want to handle what I just spoke about? Because there's tons of other stuff, or should I keep reading through?
Okay, so maybe you can select the things that I should address, that you think I should address.
Okay, maybe start with the can women be Samma Sambuddhas thing?
So there are a few passages in the Pali Canon that I'm aware of where that is where that is mentioned. Just matter of factly, there is not any actual explanation. It's just kind of like, well, this is the form in which a Samma Sambuddha appears. It also comes with some other attributes aside from like being of the male gender. Apparently, a Samma Sambuddha also has a lot of like really amusing physical qualities. So the actual, I'm not a historian and I'm not a scholar, but amongst those who are, there are lots of different debates whether or not these suttas are actual or actual words of the Buddha, or they are later sort of additions. I personally don't feel too strongly in one way or the other about those particular suttas, in the sense that so none of us actually right now can become a Samma Sambuddha. There is not one single person right now in this world system that can be a Samma Sambuddha, because we still have the teachings of the current Samma Sambuddha. So what we all have is the opportunity to become Anubuddhas right now in this lifetime, and also Samma Sambuddhas in future lives. Now, we've all been, according to the Buddhist teachings, we've been everything. So female, male, transgender, how do you call it? The intersex, like so many different variations of all over the spectrum. So if at the moment of us attaining, if we have the karma to become Samma Sambuddhas, if that comes in the form of having a male body, it's just as arbitrary as, the Samma Sambuddha always has blue eyes. Okay, well, the Samma Sambuddha always has, I don't know, dark hair. Okay, so I have dark hair now, so I have it, and I'm like, okay, great, but maybe I won't have it in my next life. Will that is that a problem? Like, who cares? The whole point is actually awakening. So those suttas actually never really troubled me in one shape or form, because it's just kind of like very arbitrary marks of the Buddha. The male gender being one of them, that it comes in that shape or form. So yeah, I'm just like I have been in the male form multiple times in previous lives. I will be in male form multiple times in the future, and maybe one of them will be Sama Sambuddha. Who knows? So whether it's accurate or inaccurate, that's what I'm trying to say. It's not really something that I think it's important to invest too much time in it. The important thing is awakening, and also I have to say that I am kind of open to any type of awakening. So I'm not particularly attached to having a Sama Sambuddha awakening or an Anubuddha awakening or a Pacceka Buddha awakening. I'm just interested in awakening. So whichever type of awakening is in my karma, that's great. Yeah, if I'll have a female body, a male body, a transgender body, no body, that's great. So whatever, just give me the awakening. So would be my answer.
Great. Then Greeno Bino asks, Ayya, any thoughts on old karma from SN 35.145? And there's a quote, now what, monks, is old karma? The I is to be seen as old karma, fabricated and willed, capable of being felt, and same with the other 6 senses.
Can you repeat, sorry, the question?
Any thoughts on old karma? And then he quotes the suttas. Now, what is old karma? The I, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, is to be seen as old karma, fabricated and willed, capable of being felt.
I would have to reread the sutta, because I don't know, this is too much of an excerpt. So it would be useful to see it in context. And right now I can't really recall that particular sutta or the context of it. But I'll look into it and get back to you on that. How's better? Instead of risking to say something inaccurate, which that, on the other hand, is really bad karma. So we don't want to mislead people.
Ryan says, thanks for the wonderful talk, Ayya. Marielle says, perhaps the best karma is to be able to experience both sides of the oppressor-oppressed dynamic. Perhaps the best karma is having the experiences that shape deep wisdom, and sometimes that can only be reached through suffering.
I would say that it's definitely not a good aspiration to have to experience oppression or to be an oppressor. Or to wish for anyone to be oppressed or to be an oppressor, but rather the aspiration is to cultivate the wholesome qualities of compassion and empathy. I think that is where we should direct the mind and just use whatever conditions we are as a sort of springboard in order to cultivate these wholesome qualities. And realistically speaking, because we are, as humans, we all have mixed karma. So we all have whatever we think is good karma and whatever we think is bad karma. So those are sort of attributes that we put to it. So we have this mixed state, though, of like whatever pleasant and unpleasant conditions. So making the most out of it. So always thinking in this moment of suffering, how can I use this moment of suffering to, first of all, really understand what suffering is and understand the suffering that other people are experiencing, and the wish to alleviate my own suffering and the suffering of others. And always watching our minds, always seeing in every single moment what is happening in the mind. Why am I
behaving in the way that I'm behaving? And where are the tendencies of mine? Why am I right now having, and we all should be honest, because we all have those tendencies of oppressing, whether it's people or whether it's non-people, but other living beings. We tend to have sometimes wholesome tendencies, but sometimes unwholesome tendencies. So constantly watching the mind and saying, okay, well, that unwholesome tendency of dismissing that person or oppressing that person is coming up, and I won't act upon it. So restraining, practicing letting go, practicing JOMO, the joy of missing out. So that's how we train our mind towards the wholesome, and we create a good opportunity for ourselves also not to experience unwholesome actions from others. So it's always watching the mind. Honestly, the more we do this practice, the more we should become aware of what is going in our minds and how we act through, our body and speech and mind, obviously, through body, speech, and mind at all times. And then shifting all of our actions through body, speech, and mind in accordance to Dharma.
And Ki, hello, Ki, says, thanks for helping alleviate suffering in the world, Ayya. And Kevin is asking people to support the monastery by donating. So thank you, Kevin, for helping out in that way. Adriana says, sadhu, thank you so much, Ayya. That was beautiful. Scott says, thank you, Ayya, for sharing the Dhamma as well as your personal experience. Jen says, thank you. Muhammad, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Gabriela says, in SN 22.100, the Dutya Gadula Buddha Sutta, there's a point that various past karma has to do with the corruption of mind. Okay. Gabriela says, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Ephasia says, it is such a compassionate view to use your suffering to develop empathy for others' suffering, similar to your own or in general. Thank you for this perspective. Gabriela says, thank you very much for your teaching. I sympathize as well, since my family is a Catholic one, and I am also a girl. Elizabeth asks, does eating animals bring bad karma?
Well, the Buddha actually said, actually it wasn't if I remember correctly, it's the Buddha quoting another Buddha, right? Do you remember it was Vipassi?
I don't remember.
Anyway, one of the previous Buddhas who actually said that the act of eating meat is not bad karma. Now, this being said, so eating meat per se, not bad karma, but the way through which you procure meat is a whole other story. So eating meat, if you're on alms rounds and someone puts meat in your bowl, my understanding of the teachings, that is blameless, because you have there's zero action through body, speech, and mind in what you get in your bowls. So for example, this monastery is vegetarian, actually mostly vegan, but we do have some dairy appearing every now and then, but mostly it's vegan. So Bhante and I try to practice vegetarianism, but when we were recently in Thailand, we were going on alms rounds most of the time. So most of the time, we just ate whatever was given to us in our bowls. And you have no idea what is in your bowls. Sometimes you can kind of figure out what is in your bowl. Sometimes you have no idea. So actually, once I thought that whatever was in in my thing was I thought it was tofu or something, and then I eat it. I'm like, that's definitely not tofu. So I ate meat, but that in accordance to the teachings in the Theravada tradition, that is a blameless act, because it's blameless the way that I got food to begin with. Now, when we get to there's also certain restrictions through which we can get food as monastics. So for example, it's not that like anything that they put in our bowl is fine, is okay. But rather, if we think that the person, we have any reason, rather than we think, if we have any reason to suspect that the person is putting meat in our bowl, which has been killed for our specific need. So for example, if Jen tomorrow goes, and Jen is one of our residents here, goes and kills a fish and then brings it to us here at the monastery and goes, oh yeah, look at this great fish, I just made fish for you all. We cannot, by Vinaya, we can't eat it. We have to say no. So any kind of animal that has been killed for the sake of the monastic sangha, there's a clear rule, and that's a moral rule, because in that circumstance, actually, there would be some karma, there would be some responsibility. So we would be indirectly encouraging people to kill on our behalves. So I believe that's why there is that restriction. In the Mahayana tradition, they practice vegetarianism. And my understanding of that is that as Buddhism started spreading in different countries, and monastics went to countries, kind of like our experience actually in the West. Being a Theravada monastic in the West makes you very, especially in America, I would say, makes you very sympathetic to, or very like kind of first direct experience of the historical, monastics going to China and experiencing a different culture. Where my understanding from the history was that back then in China, people were expected to be self-sufficient. So seeing people that were asking for food, that were mendicants, wasn't quite appreciated. So then the monastics, because they had very little support in terms of in the format that was happening in ancient India of people giving them alms, started growing their own food. And so as monastics got closer and closer to the food chain, then also their way of eating became closer and closer to obviously non-harming. So the more you have a say in what you're eating, the more you'll go, you'll make it in the most, in the least harmful to animals as possible. So of course, all the Mahayana monastics never used animals to cultivate food, nor then actually took any animal products. Eggs are considered meat in Mahayana Buddhism, or actually in Asia, I seem to understand in general. So they do not eat meat, eggs as well. So fundamentally, actually, they're for the most part vegan, I would say. That was my impression when I went to Taiwan, at least. I was like, oh, well, in Chinese culture, for the most part, they don't really use dairy. I seem to understand that it's a recent introduction with globalization. So by default, the monastics weren't eating dairy products. And on top of that, they weren't eating any meat. Hence, de facto, they were vegan. They have been vegan. So it's been the sort of longest vegan experiment of the history of mankind. And alive and well, they're doing fine. So quite successful, I would say. But it also gives you a glimpse on the karmic retribution. So when you live a life dedicated to the Buddhist teachings, then you see that the closest you are to having choices
the more you want to lead them to the wholesome. But ultimately, remembering that what we're trying to practice is non-harming or harm reduction. That's what ultimately we want to practice compassion. But it's kind of like, the end goal is the total absence of greed, hatred, and delusion. But right now, obviously, we have a mind full of greed, hatred, and delusion. So what we want to do is practice harm reduction. And then by practicing harm reduction, compassion is the end result. So just really making an honest assessment of your situation. This is what I always recommend, and what I also practice here as well, since we have, as monastics, a sort of relative kind of, not control would be a strong word, but we kind of have a say in how we eat in most Western monasteries, because we are in a radically different situation than, say, Thailand or Burma or Sri Lanka, where there's a constant flow of lay people supporting the monastics. So you'll see, for example, Bhavana Society, that is a Sri Lankan monastery, Bhanteji was like, well, we're vegetarian, because similarly to us, he has a kind of say in what goes into the kitchen. So point being is the recommendation, I would say, is a genuine assessment. So if currently right now you're a meat eater and you eat meat 3 times a day, perhaps consider eating meat twice a day or maybe once a day. And then consider going, well, I can't really renounce meat, but can I renounce eating meat that is from the supermarket? And can I actually source it from a more ethical place? So not where animals are tortured in the most horrible way, but in a way where they have a somewhat relatively okay life and are killed at the end of whenever it is, which is still not ideal, but definitely better that than the Holocaust, right? So they are killed, but at least they are treated with some sort of decency. So we practice harm reduction. So it's significantly more expensive to eat meat sourced in an ethical way. So maybe we can eat less meat, but we can eat it from a place that is sourced properly. Once we are at that stage, then we can go, okay, well, maybe instead of eating meat every day sourced properly, maybe I can eat it 3 times a week, then maybe twice a week, maybe once a week. Maybe actually I can become vegetarian and not eat meat at all and still be lacto-ovo-vegetarian. And then from lacto-ovo-vegetarian, you kind of scale it down, always with the aspiration of practicing compassion, but also being, kind of forgiving to yourself, going, okay, well, I would really wish to be vegan all the time and be impeccable with my conduct, but also bearing in mind that even through veganism, one can never be 100% harm-free. There's always a lot of suffering coming with our food, which we should be aware of all the time. But there is less suffering and less suffering and less suffering. So the commitment to live a harmless life, but also being realistic with where we're at. Otherwise, if we meet, 4 times a day, going from that to veganism, I think it has a sort of 0.0001% success rate. So we want to kind of increase our success rate. There are very few people that can kind of do that overnight. So trying to really wish, may I be a better person, and letting go of our cravings as we go.
Okay. There's another 3 or 4 questions.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll try to give speedy answers.
Okay. Melvin says, it's my understanding that there are many more rules for female monastics than male. I have no experience or knowledge about this subject, but always wondered if some rules were antiquated or sexist.
There are more rules for females than there are for males, but actually most of them are ironically related on fabric. There's a bunch of different extra rules on fabric. Some are actually in place to prevent
female monastics from becoming oppressed by male monastics. So there are some amusing rules like that a bhikkhuni cannot do the laundry for a bhikkhu, but there's not the equivalent rule. So a bhikkhu can do the laundry for a bhikkhuni, but a bhikkhuni cannot do the laundry for a bhikkhu. That we will keep at Buddhist Insights because it's great. We'll be practicing that all the time. What was?
Oh, he's asking, are some of the rules antiquated or sexist?
There are sexist interpretations of some rules, I would say. That is more what it is rather than the rule being sexist or anything. There are some rules definitely that are very related to living in India 2,500 years ago, but that is no different in the Bhikkhuni Vinaya than it is in the Bhikkhu Vinaya.
Okay, then Rupa asks, somehow this pandemic makes me wonder, would this suffering be caused by our karmic actions?
Well, if we keep on wondering that question, our head will explode. So I would recommend once again, instead of thinking, who have I been in the past? What have I done in the past? And all of those endless questions, thinking, well, what can we do now how can we become better humans? How can we become better stewards of the planet? How can we care more about our neighbors? How can we generate more wholesome mind states? So it is a time of extreme suffering. Let's take it as an opportunity to alleviate suffering in the near future rather than, keep on mindlessly doing whatever we were doing before with our quote unquote, when our life was quote unquote normal. It was not normal at all. So there was still a lot of extreme suffering happening. It was just that it wasn't, once again, we were a bit oblivious about it because it wasn't interfering too much with our day-to-day life. So now we have a great opportunity to actually look at this. But it's not an opportunity to self-flagellate. It's not an opportunity to create some sort of sense of guilt. That's a big waste of time. But rather acknowledge that we have all the great opportunity to make wholesome karma right now. And immediately now, during the pandemic, so literally thinking, how can I be of benefit to the doctors, to the healthcare workers, to the neighbors, to the elderly people that live close by? How can I support, the small local businesses? How can I support my friends? How can I support my family? So in the immediate sense, but also thinking in the future, how can we become better stewards of the land and create stronger and tighter communities?
Ephasia asks, I guess the ultimate question is, does karma play a role in whether one takes rebirth as a male or female in one environment as opposed to another?
Can you repeat that question?
Does karma play a role in whether one takes rebirth as a male or female in one environment as opposed to another?
I would say probably, but don't take my word on it because I'm not enlightened, so I can't see actually all causes and consequences. I would say that definitely plays a role, but I wouldn't say that the qualitative sort of statement that we make, I don't think that is necessarily accurate. Actually, I would say that's probably inaccurate. Otherwise, the Buddha would have been quite specific about it. Just like he created certain, just like there were different realms of beings and different realms of rebirth. Fundamentally, he just talks about the human rebirth. And we will actually be studying with Bhante one of my favorite suttas, the Vasetta Sutta. In the Vasetta Sutta, the Buddha actually speaks about it, like really breaks down gender, race, social status, etc. And pretty much talks about I always like to talk about tomatoes because they're very popular in my country, but how we get so obsessed with all these different particularities, such as gender, such as race, etc., thinking that it makes us very different and very unique beings, almost like different species. But fundamentally, we're just different types of tomatoes. So kind of saying that, a San Marzano tomato is a better rebirth than a cherry tomato is kind of like bizarre and pointless. There is a cherry tomato and there's a San Marzano tomato, which are different than Italian basil and Thai basil. But between Italian basil and Thai basil, they all have the same sort of essence, in the same shape and form, the same qualities. It's just that the attributes are slightly different. And so you can say that, for example, the different types of basil are maybe the cat realm. So they all share the same connotations, but they're different flavors. And the tomatoes are humans. So they all have different shapes and forms, but they're still tomatoes. They all have, red skin with seeds inside and pulp, and they kind of taste like a tomato. So whether it's a female Italian tomato or a male American tomato or a female Chinese tomato or a female Burmese tomato or a male basil, let's stand the cat. The only kind of differentiation that is worth making is between the basil and the tomato, but not between the tomatoes.
Sally asks, we might be here for a long time. Sally asks, if not everything happened because of karma, then what is the reason in the back for something to happen?
Well, the thing is, once again, the karma is not a predeterministic understanding of the world. So while it's true on one hand to say that everything we experience is karma, it's also very dangerous to say so, because it falls under the idea that our life is already laid out. So then it would make no sense. The whole Buddhist path would have no meaning whatsoever. Because if everything is already predetermined, then there is no purpose in acting upon it. There's no way to shift. There's no end of suffering. So it's important to understand causality and interdependence. So it's important to understand, my understanding of karma is that everything is so every moment is the product of my previous action, but every moment I also have a way to shape things. So there is both karma and vipaka. So there is vipaka, what I'm experiencing right now, but also every moment I'm experiencing karma, so I'm making an action. It's just that everything happens so quickly that we can't really distinguish the two. But once again, if we get too caught in the details of what we think our karmic conditions are, our head will explode, because we have no idea, unless you are actually an enlightened being who has developed the superpower of seeing through countless lives. Because not necessarily is my understanding that if you are an awakened being, unless you're a Sama Buddha, obviously, that you can see the countless lives that you've lived in full detail. Then unless you have that divine knowledge, you can't actually quite say, you can't really understand why you have that particular shape or form. Hence, it's an entire waste of time trying to figure out why me? You get into the whole sort of self-bashing, or just creating more wrong view and attaching even more to the sort of self of identity. So we're trying to realize non-self by
building up more and more sense of self, seems a little bit besides the point, like seems a little bit counterproductive. So the Buddha always recommends to, instead of obsessing about the past, to actually always go down to back to the Four Noble Truths. So this is suffering, this is the cause of suffering, this is the end of suffering, and this is the way out of suffering. So this is a skillful way to actually address our conditions. It's unskillful to keep obsessing and creating lots of stories about our past and about the past of other people. And especially getting into the danger of, which is basically the caste system, the danger of thinking that whatever kind of experience people are facing is due to their past actions, hence they are guilty of it. Because realistically, each one of us has been a murderer. So sooner or later, we are going to reap the consequences of our actions. Each one of us has been stingy. Each one of us has been jealous and envious. Each one of us has done countless unwholesome things. I mean, within this life, if we think about it, let alone thinking about countless lifetimes. So unwholesome results will happen to every single being. What we're trying to think or to focus on is, once again, to create the conditions for wholesome results to come in the future, but not obsessing about what has happened in the past, and especially not creating even more unwholesome results by telling other people that they deserve whatever bad karma they are experiencing. That is the most awful karma that we can create.
And one last question.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is Sally. Sally says, thank you, Ayya, to bring independent thinking to people. Lots have rooted ideas for difference between male and female, born to be taught their truths when we still don't have wisdom. Right now, even when we know society, culture are not necessarily true or good, how do we change the habitual tendency thoughts since they have been rooted for so many years?
Great. Thank you so much for asking that question. Yeah, that was very apparent to me, actually, and really understanding even why I had so many different kind of opinions, let's call them for what they are, opinions of gender, that were radically different to what I was exposed to when I, started walking this path. So it comes back to what I was talking about a few days ago, the idea that we think that our ideas are ours, and we are, for the most part, we don't question the culture that we live in, that we grow in. So we have, for the most part, very little critical thinking to begin with in analyzing our cultural conditioning. So we think that, for the most part, once again, I am whatever, a feminist because I'm a feminist, or I am, a strong woman because I'm a strong woman, or I'm a weak woman because I'm a weak woman, or I'm a depressed woman because I'm a depressed woman. Whatever kind of thing, experience that we're having, we think that it's entirely in our domain. And it is and it isn't. In the way that it becomes in our domain of action when we actually fully understand all the causes and conditions that create our experience. And the only way that we can understand that is by actually fully, first of all, analyzing the culture that we have been raised in. Being exposed to different cultures is also very helpful to kind of create a bit of a shift of experience, and realizing that a different experience of the world is possible. So before I left Italy, my mind was very, very much stuck in a certain way. Like
certain experience of reality, a certain sense of, for example, beauty that was put to me, was presented to me. This is what a beautiful person is, and this is what an ugly person is. And you're kind of like a little bit here, going close to the ugly. This was what was presented to me. Then I went to Australia, and all of a sudden, actually, I was more leading toward the beautiful. And I was like, oh, that's bizarre. Then I went to the UK, and I was, once again, leaning towards the ugly. Then I went to the United States, and it was in the middle, turning, according to the neighborhood where I was living, either the beautiful or the ugly. So it was kind of like very interesting, because it made me think, well, where is my idea of beauty coming to begin with? Where is it based on? And where my brothers get their idea of what a female is supposed to look like, etc. Or that was also a realization of where my attachment to food came. I remember, up until a few years ago, like a friend of mine remember called me, and she was like, oh, I'm about to break up with my boyfriend who's British, because he made really awful pasta. And I was like, oh yeah, that's terrible. Yeah, you should totally break up with him. How dare he? We were like so upset about this pasta. I hadn't even tried the pasta, but it was something that, like for us Italians, it was such a like strong, like really, he butchered the pasta, the poor pasta. And then just by hanging out with non-Italians for so long, I was able to realize how bizarre that Italians were taking food as a such serious matter, wherein, for the most part, in American culture, not there being a sort of homogenous millenary culinary cuisine, I guess, or heritage, people have very utilitarian approach towards food. So you start, just by these kind of examples, you start deconstructing your mind. You start analyzing, okay, well, this comes from this sort of experience that I had in life, coming from here and there. This other idea that I have comes from this other kind of sort of circumstances. And then you start also analyzing yourself in terms of gender. So while becoming woke, I found actually, I started reading a lot of material too, to kind of help me understand my experience of reality and how I was conditioned also to think in a certain way. So I find, for example, a lot of the material, now I have to say that I am relatively woke because I don't read much of that stuff, but I do read it here and there, just to help me kind of understand, for example, American society. So understand race theory within this society. I find it extremely helpful because it makes me understand why certain people have certain mind states or attitudes that are radically different than mine. And why do I have those mind states, and why do they have, not mind states, ideas that are different than others. So deconstructing them, once again, using it as tools to really look at the connections in your reality, and then seeing how you have, if you have, worked in one way or the other. So for example, I realized that most of my life, I decided to always take behind the scenes roles. And up until Buddhist practice, up until Buddhist insights, actually up until like 1 or 2 years ago, I realized, I thought that was a choice of preference. So that is what I felt comfortable. That is what I liked doing. That was my career choice. And then as I became woke, I kind of started realizing, well, even though I worked in an industry where I didn't have that much of an experience of sexism, I still grew up in a patriarchal culture, and I was still somewhat indoctrinated that women have to have a kind of behind the scene role, or sort of more subtle role. So it's all things that, I started
upholding and looking at. That is what is important doing. It's not like saying, oh, well, now I have to be at the forefront, or now I have to be at the back, but rather thinking, oh, maybe that's why I act in a certain way. That's why I tend to be submissive sometimes. And sometimes I tend to be a little bit more on the kind of confident and aggressive because I was working in a sort of different field. So you start connecting the dots with, instead of what you think is you, as your personality, you start identifying, you're like, oh, I have that quality because I was in that sort of environment. I had this other quality, cultivated this other quality because I was in that other environment. So fundamentally, none of this is you. Fundamentally, this is all causes and conditions, and they're impermanent and completely immaterial. But it's important to understand them for what they are, and then to replace them for something that is beneficial. So thinking, instead of going, okay, I'll just keep on following my tendencies of being like, whatever, the submissive woman, thinking, or even like sometimes it has nothing to do with being submissive. Sometimes it's just covering some sort of stereotypical gender roles, like being in the kitchen, or I don't know, doing administrative stuff, etc. And thinking, well, what is actually beneficial? Maybe it's not something that I want to do right now, to talk in front of people. It's good that there's only 4 people in the room, including Stan, the cat. But maybe it's actually beneficial. It's beneficial for the larger scope of just not having me, not as in Ayyā Somā, but me being a female monastic, always being seen in the kitchen, always being seen doing an administrative role. So perhaps it's better if I start pushing myself to do other things for the benefit of myself and others. But not in the sense of like, oh, I need power, oh, I need to be seen, oh, gender equality, etc. But rather it's sort of, once again, deconstructing and a sense of sort of a path of exploring our mindsets, exploring why we do the things that we do, and then also seeing what is beneficial. Because if other people, other women, then see more female monastics being more at the forefront rather than in the kitchen, then they will also have a sense that it is possible to have a different role in Buddhism outside of the kitchen. I can't speak English anymore. Like 9 after 9.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ayya, for this beautiful marathon discussion on karma. And since it's getting late, I think we'll go ahead and close the session for now. So thank you, all of you who have joined in and participated. I find it really lovely that there's all this conversation going on about these subjects. And a last goodbye from the kitty. And please join us.
Bye.
Please join us again at 8 a.m. Tomorrow for a sutta study, and 7:30 in the evening for more meditation and Dhamma discussion. All right. Take care.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.